Okay, it's 3:40, so I should get underway. I don't know what happened to Nick, but before I get underway, during the last tutorial, the system collapsed. I was able to get it up and running. The problem was not here at my place because my wife is working from home and she's on Zoom currently, and it was working. Our Wi-Fi was working perfectly. So there's something happened to the tutorial Zoom link. So I'm going to start, but I'm just warning you that it's possible we might have a similar problem. And I don't know whether I will be able to get the system up and running, but I will try. If not, what I will do is I will record the tutorial, but I'm hoping that it will work. Okay, so I'm going to share the tutorial problem. I also mentioned, I should mention, as I've said previously, these tutorials are voluntary, but I do take a role because you can help yourself. And in any situation of doubt, if your grade is on the margin, I'll look at these roles and say, okay, did this person come along? You can benefit yourself. You can't harm yourself, but you can benefit yourself by coming along. Right. General catch-up. Do either of you have any questions, comments, or suggestions? Are you having any particular problems that you'd like me to address? If you are and you don't feel comfortable raising them with me in the tutorial, then feel free to email me. We can have a Zoom chat or discussion by phone. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the material that you're not understanding between now and the test in the week following the mid-trimester break. All right. This tutorial is, last year I set it as an assignment, but I decided this year to do it as a tutorial problem. And I had actually last year an ulterior objective, which I'll get to at the end. That just by way of introduction, I have found by experience that commercial law students struggle with law because they struggle to make the transition from seeing the concrete world through the prism of legal rules, that the ability to transition to a world in which you see the world, the concrete world, the world of people and actions and things through the prism of law and legal rules is the point at which you really begin to understand the law. And commercial law students struggle because they dabble in law. Law students also struggle with it, but they do make the transition. Most of them do anyway, because they get immersed in law, and it sort of, that immersion forces you to see the world through the prism of rules. But in the end, the law is just a way of thinking. It's an applied and artificial branch of ethics or moral reasoning. It's about reasoning about acts. Okay, but to understand it, you've got to see acts and omissions through the prism of legal rules. And this report by the Reserve Bank is a classic example of looking at the world not through the prism of legal rules, with the result that the report is a disastrous piece of public officialdom, which I'll explain towards the end. There's only two of you live, so I am recording this because this is the Zoom tutorial, and I have a couple of students who work full-time, and So I'm just going to lead the discussion. And the bank makes the following observations, and these observations are key to the total failure of the bank to understand that which it administers, namely the financial system in New Zealand. So hopefully that will become apparent as we go through. So I'm just going to go through these assertions that the bank makes. I've referenced them in the footnotes. That's the page number. That's where the bank makes these claims. What are they? The bank says that banknotes provided a lighter and more convenient form of money backed only by trust in the issuer. That's a description of the history. It's not a description of the current position of banknotes. It's just discussing how the banking industry, if one could call it an industry, as opposed to a service, developed the banknote, and that's true historically. But the issue is whether or not it's true to say that banknotes were a lighter and more convenient form of money backed only by trust in the issuer. Secondly, digital money is a form of money you cannot touch. That's what the bank says and believes, apparently. Most money is now held and stored as digital money. So we'll assess the truth of that. Most digital money, such as bank balances and mobile wallets. So the bank thinks that, first of all, that bank balances and mobile wallets are digital money, and that those are themselves forms of money. They're forms of money you can't touch. So that's two examples, two contextual examples of what the bank calls digital money, namely money you can't touch. It also says that most digital money has equal value with money. So we'll assess the truth of that and rely on conventional payment infrastructure or fixed conventional digital money. Okay, so that's what the bank thinks. Digital money is all non-tangible forms of currency. So non-tangible forms of money, all non-tangible forms of currency, money, including conventional digital money having a par value with cash, for example, bank deposits, prepaid vouchers, and cards. Okay, we'll talk about cards presently, and cryptocurrencies. What's a cryptocurrency? The word crypto is a Greek word meaning hidden. So it's hidden currencies. A cryptocurrency is a hidden currency. A crypt, if you didn't know what a crypt is, it's a hidden room, typically in a church or a cathedral, but other places too. It's a hidden room, normally down below. A place for hiding things, including valuables, for example. Both cash and fixed conventional digital money represent, that's the verb that the Reserve Bank uses, represent New Zealand dollars. Both are useful forms of money to write prices in dollars, the unit of account, using dollars to purchase goods and services, the medium of exchange, building up savings in dollars, the store of value. It's odd that the bank says that cash and fixed conventional digital money are useful forms of money to write prices in dollars, the unit of account. It is true that that money is the universal unit of account, but that is not writing prices in dollar. That is the universal measure of value, not the universal unit of account. The unit of account is something different. So the bank itself doesn't seem to understand very well the functions of the very thing that it administers. All right, so those are the assertions, or sufficient assertions, I should say, made by the bank in its report, to which the questions below are directed. And before I move to those questions to go through the tutorial, I would say, in all fairness to the bank, that the bank perspective in the report is a combination of an economic perspective and a social policy perspective. And that's perfectly appropriate. The bank should be interested in the economics of its proposal, particularly vis-a-vis the financial system, and also social policy. That's all very, and I actually agree with the conclusion of the report, which was that it wouldn't abolish money as such. My concern is the fact that it totally failed to view that which it administers through the prism of legal rules. And those legal rules really matter, as I hope to show in this tutorial. Right, now I ask a general question: which of these propositions do you think are true? What I'm hoping to show you is that most of them are untrue. So that's just a general kind of introduction. But I'm asking you to look critically at the things that the bank is saying in this report, and that goes to my ulterior motive, my ultimate objective in this tutorial is to help you think about what people in authority say. Okay, that's my ultimate objective. Okay, so in terms of the specific questions, did banknotes provide a lighter and more convenient form of money backed only by trust in the issuer? So to help you answer this and understand whether or not what the bank says is true, I asked you to think about what is a banknote, or what was it historically, and how was it enforced? Now, I talked to you about banknotes in the beginning of the course. I've also mentioned it in the material on promissory notes under the Bills of Exchange Act. Banknotes were a promissory note issued by a bank. And it's certainly true that banknotes were a lighter and more convenient thing functioning as money, but it is certainly not a form of money. A banknote, being a promissory note issued by a bank, is an instrument. An instrument is a document with direct legal effect. You might say, well, what's the difference between an instrument and any written contract? Well, the answer is that documents frequently evidence legal concepts. It's a matter of evidence, but they're not necessarily instruments. So an instrument is something with direct legal effect, that the instrument itself is necessary for the legal effect. Okay, so you cannot have a negotiable instrument that is verbal. It's got to be a document, a written document. So the law contains various instruments. Negotiable instruments is a very, very well-known example. So a banknote is a promissory note, an instrument issued by a bank promising to pay money on demand. Okay, so it's a formal type of contract, historically developed by Italian merchants, and then it moved around Europe as merchants traveled around Europe doing business. Okay, so it's a type of contract. It's a promise to pay money. It's not itself money. It's a debtor-creditor relationship, and contingently so, contingent on demand. What is the contract? It's a promise, contractual covenant or promise to pay, confer possession of money itself on the person bearing the note, that either the payee or bearer, if it's a transferee from the payee. And so you perform the obligation imposed by the note by conferring possession of money. That's not possible with money itself. There's no obligation to perform with money itself. Money itself is the universal measure of extrinsic value. It is in and of itself a thing. It's not itself the subject of an obligation to be performed. Okay, so there's a fundamental distinction between money itself and a debt. Okay, and this is a debt instrument, and that's important, as we'll see. So a banknote was not money, and secondly, was it backed only by trust in the issuer? Well, it's certainly true that confidence is vital to banking because of the asymmetry between assets and liabilities. Typically, liabilities are on demand, bank deposits payable on demand, versus bank assets, money lent out to borrowers on term. So there's an asymmetry in terms of when the money can be demanded, and that presents a risk. So confidence in banks is crucial. That's why banks are regulated, and that's the subject of a topic in the last third of the course. Okay, so it's true that that trust is important, but the bank says backed only by trust in the issuer. That's false. A promissory note was a formal contract which could be enforced by legal proceedings, and the power of the state was deployed to ensure that the possessor of the promissory note, the bank note, was able to obtain money itself. So if after proceedings the bank didn't pay on the order of the court to pay, then the bearer of the note can go back to the court, ask for execution against the assets of the bank. So the sheriff or the bailiff can go out, seize possession of land or other tangible assets of the bank, sell them, and use the proceeds to pay off the judgment debt. So banknotes were backed by the force of the state. Okay, so it's simply not true to say that they were backed only by trust in the issuer. All right, 3, is digital money money? What is digital money? Is it a single class of thing? So if you look at the examples that the bank gives for, it says that it's all tangible forms of money, including conventional digital money having a par value with cash, such as bank deposits, prepaid vouchers, and cards and cryptocurrencies. Okay, so there's a bunch of examples of what the bank thinks are digital money. So I ask you, is digital money money? What is digital money? So, well, digital money includes a bank balance. Is a bank balance money? Answer, no. As I explained to you in great detail in the material on the contract current account, it's a very complicated contractual relationship, and including relevantly, it's a contingent debt obligation. So if there's a positive balance in the account, the customer can go into the bank and demand payment between the lowest fraction of the currency, namely 10 cents. I think now is the lowest fraction you can demand, 10 cents, all the way up to the balance and any amount in between. So it's not a solidary liability. It's not a single sum. It's the right to claim any sum. So you can see that that's quite a complicated legal relationship. That doesn't exhaust the legal relationship. Includes also the right to direct a bank to pay a third party. We call that a mandate. And again, the amount can be anywhere between the lowest fraction of the currency, 10 cents, all the way up to the balance in the account. So again, a very complicated mandate relationship. And then there's more to it than that. There's more to it than that, which I'll explain when I talk to you about the payment system. So a bank balance is not money. It's a very complicated legal relationship in the nature of a contingent debt or contingent mandate. What's the contingency? Demand. So it's contingent on demand. So when that contingency is satisfied, the bank has either an accrued or a present debt or mandate duty. So that's one kind of digital money. Is it a single class of thing? Well, let's look at the examples the bank uses. Bank deposits, that's your bank balance, prepaid vouchers, and cards. Well, let's think about the difference between bank deposits and cards. What are cards? Are cards a bank balance? Answer, no, they're not. They are a means of communication. So the bank cards are very sophisticated technology. The electronic engineering is impressive, but it's just a means of communicating with a bank and making demand on a bank. That's all it is. And that is not the same thing as the legal relationship between the bank and its customer. Okay, so you can see that there's the so-called digital money is different classes of things. It's a description of a legal relationship in relation to bank balances on the one hand, cards, a means of communication on the other. Those things are not the same legally. I'll come back to that topic. The question 4, does digital money have the same value as money? The bank says that they do. So digital money has a par value with cash. So the bank says bank deposits, amongst other things, has a par value with cash. Does a bank card have a par value with cash? No. I mean, a bank card is not itself a measure of value. It's just a means of communicating. So, but let's put that aside. Let's talk about the difference between bank deposits on the one hand and cash on the other. So does digital money have the same value as money? Answer, no. In theory, for example, low balances in a current account which don't draw interest or don't earn interest, I guess you could say that that those balances have the same nominal value as money. But in most cases, bank balances, certainly it's true of term deposits, but even significant balances in a current account and certainly balances in a savings account, they earn interest. And it's precisely because they earn interest that from an economic perspective, possession of money itself, namely cash, coins and notes, is considered to be an economic cost because there's an opportunity cost. If you have possession of money itself, you are foregoing interest, and that's considered to be an economic cost. And so from an economic perspective, a bank balance is more valuable than money itself. And that's precisely why debt instruments are traded on debt exchanges, because they have value. And the differences between the debt instruments have value. People trade in the margin between the interest rate payable on one instrument with the interest payable on the other. The higher the rate of interest, the more valuable it is. So it's just not true to say that digital money in the form of bank balances have the same value as money. Digital money in the form of cards have no value. I mean, you can see that if you lose a card, you get another one. You don't suffer any economic cost by losing a card. The bank does, actually. So why do people convert money into digital money in the form of bank balances? Well, because they earn an economic return, so that it's economically more valuable than possession of money itself. Okay, so it's 4:05. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. Are cryptocurrencies money? So what's an example of a cryptocurrency? Bitcoin is an example of a cryptocurrency. Is Bitcoin money? Well, people think of it as a form of money. That's why they're called cryptocurrencies. But if you think about how the value of a cryptocurrency is measured, what you will see is that either they are measured against an actual currency, for example, measured against the US dollar, and there's an index that measures the value of Bitcoin against the US dollar. So what's happening is that the Bitcoin is being measured, the value of the Bitcoin is being measured using the US dollar. Alternatively, there's an index that measures the value of cryptocurrencies against a basket of currencies with weighting depending on the importance of the currency. That measures the value of a cryptocurrency against a basket of actual currencies. That should tell you that Bitcoins are not themselves, and cryptocurrencies generally are not money. I think in the first week I explained to you the difference between the four functions of money, and one of which is fundamental, namely the universal measure of value. And notice it's measure of extrinsic value, not intrinsic value. And then three derivative functions of money, namely the universal means of storing value, the universal means of exchange in transactional terms, and the universal unit of account. Those three functions are derivative functions of money because they depend on money as the fundamental universal measure of value. The measurement of cryptocurrencies against the US dollar or another currency or the basket of currencies is actually a measure of the intrinsic value of the cryptocurrencies, not a measure of extrinsic value. And so that's the reason why when you use a Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency in a transaction, the contract is not one of sale, it's rather one of a contract of barter. And I talked to you about the difference between contracts of sale and contracts of barter early on in the course, where a sale is a contract for real or personal property in consideration of the payment of money, and money is determined by the jurisdiction of the country in which the currency is used. So in New Zealand, it's the New Zealand dollar. In the US dollar. In Britain, the pound sterling, etc. The euro is unusual and because it transcends the individual jurisdictions. That's one of the reasons why it's a catastrophe from an economic perspective. I won't go into that now, but by contrast, cryptocurrencies are not money under, I think, one or two jurisdictions may have been given legal effect to a cryptocurrency. I'm not certain about that. I know that the Swedish jurisdiction was setting up its own digital currency, but the cryptocurrencies are not themselves money because the law of relevant jurisdictions do not say that they are the universal measure of value. That means that using cryptocurrencies and transactions renders them contracts of barter rather than contracts of sale. All right, anyone have any questions to that point? All right. 6, are bank balances money or are they something else? Bank balances are not money. They are contingent debt or contingent mandate obligations. They are not money. If they were money, it wouldn't be necessary to go and make demand on the bank for money itself. when you make demand, the bank has a duty to confer possession of money upon you. Or if you make demand by way of a mandate directing the bank to pay a third party, if the bank balances were money itself, it wouldn't be necessary for the bank to make a payment to a third party, but yet the bank is and must make a payment to a third party in order to perform its mandate obligation. Now, how the bank performs the mandate obligation is a topic for discussion when I talk about the payment system, because the mandates, I think the nature of mandates have changed with the abolition of domestic cheques in New Zealand. But historically, cheques were bills of exchange drawn on a banker payable on demand. You would go into the bank and demand receipt of money itself, and the bank would have to pay you money to perform its mandate as between itself and the bank customer, the drawer of the cheque. So bank balances are not money. There's something else: contingent debt, contingent mandate obligations, which must be performed by the bank by some means. 7, are mobile wallets money? I don't myself have a mobile wallet. I believe my wife has a mobile wallet. I believe that mobile wallets are a means of exchange through a mobile phone to a bank account. So they are simply a means of exchange as between a customer and its bank. So I go and say, is there a difference between the manipulation of a bank balance and the modes of communication to do so? Well, the answer is yes. The manipulations of bank balances, as we'll see when I talk to you about the payment system, deploy very, very ancient legal concepts, very ancient indeed, going back into the early medieval period. That's the law. So you need to view this through the perspective of legal rules. They're pretty old, archaic legal rules, but still good law in New Zealand. And the means of communication to do so. So the means of communication are increasingly sophisticated. I mean, initially they were, you could do it verbally at the counter. Then you could do it through the cheque, the written communication, then through the use of cards, electronic cards, and now through mobile wallets. So to help you understand the difference, what is the legal difference between use of an ATM and withdrawal at the counter? Both the use of an ATM, where you put your card into the ATM, this has been around since around about 1980. I think the first ATMs were deployed in New Zealand. What's the difference between use of an ATM and a withdrawal at a counter? From a legal perspective, there's no difference. The technology is obviously very different and very impressive technology. But from a legal perspective, there's no difference between the two. They're both means of communicating an instruction demanding that the bank pay you, the customer. When you make demand, then there's an accrued obligation and the bank's required to pay you. So if you put your card into an ATM machine and the bank didn't pay you for whatever reason, because, for example, the technology failed, the bank would be in default. Now, it might be if the ATM is out of cash, that its liability to pay you is excluded, and that would typically be the case that the ATM would say it's out of cash. Use another one example. But if it didn't, if it had cash in it and for some reason failed, you made demand upon it by using the card, using the PIN, specifying the amount that the bank is required to pay you, and then for some reason the machine failed, the bank would be in default of its debt obligation. Similarly, when you make demand at the counter, you tell a teller, you identify yourself and you say, I want $1,000 from my account. If that's a valid demand, the bank's required to pay you. When it pays you, it's performing the debt obligation. The same is true of a withdrawal from an ATM. The bank is performing the debt obligation. Now, performance of the debt obligation is one thing. The means by which you communicate the demand for it to do so is something quite different. From a legal perspective, there's no difference between these modes of communication. They're just means of making demand on a bank. Okay, right. Any questions to that point? You could put them in the chat if you want to write a question in the chat if you don't feel comfortable verbalizing your question. All right. Richie says no. Is that a thumbs up? I just understands. Okay, thank you, Richie. Yep. Does cash represent New Zealand dollars? That's addressing this last assertion made here. Both cash and fixed conventional digital money represent New Zealand dollars. Does cash represent New Zealand dollars? No, it doesn't represent New Zealand dollars. It is New Zealand dollars. It is the legally authoritative universal measure of value. Okay, so the actual physical coins or notes might be a factor of the dollar. So we have one measure of value, it's the dollar, and all other items of money are either a factor or a multiple. So you have $1, you can have $1 trillion. That's a multiple of the dollar. But the universal measure of extrinsic value is the New Zealand dollar, and all items of money are either a factor or a multiple, but they don't represent New Zealand dollars. They are New Zealand dollars. By contrast, bank balances are the content of the legal duty owed by the bank to its customers contingently. What contingency? Demand, as previously discussed. Okay, the last question. What would have happened if the bank had abolished cash without providing an alternative form of money? Think about the relationship between money and debt. How would the debt duty be performed if money were abolished? What would have happened if the bank had abolished money is that the financial system would have collapsed. Of course, what would have happened is that people with knowledge would have screeched and there would have been very, very prompt action, including remedial action. But if the bank had abolished money without providing an alternative form of money, not only would money have ceased to exist, but also so would have debt. Why? Because the debt obligation, has content. What is the content of that obligation? It is the duty, the legal duty to confer possession of a certain sum of money on or by a certain day. That's that fundamental definition of a debt, which I gave you in the first week of the course, defined by Chief Justice de Glanville in around about 1185. But it goes back. The instant you have the concept of money under the Lydians, then you will get the concept of debt. Okay, and that's precisely the reason why the Lydian economy took off. One of the reasons why it took off and brought the Persian Empire down upon itself, or down upon it, not itself, down upon it. So yeah, if the bank had abolished cash without providing an alternative form of money, not only would money have ceased to exist, but also so would have debt, because debt would have lacked any content. There would have been no meaning to debt. And if there's no meaning to debt, it can't exist. And if you think about how wealth is held in New Zealand now, how people choose to invest value, the majority of value is in debt claims, contingent debt claims, pension funds, managed funds, term deposits, savings accounts, etc., etc., etc. So more wealth is held in the form of debt than is held in real estate. Historically and in medieval times, there was more money, more wealth was held in the form of land, because land produced stuff. Capitalism develops, you find that there's a transfer of wealth away from physical things to income earning assets like equity. Your shares are a contingent right to the payment of dividends, contingent right to a share in the proceeds of a solvent liquidation, contingent rights to payments by banks in terms of term deposits, current accounts, savings accounts, etc., contingent rights to the payment of money held by pension funds, managed funds, etc. So that's how we hold money nowadays. Land still has very significant value because of the artificial raising of prices by the Resource Management Act, which suppresses the supply of land. That rises prices, but even so, still more wealth is held in the form of contractual claims in the nature of contingent debts. And if that all lacks meaning because there is no obligation to be performed, then the concept of a debt lacks meaning. So you would have the instantaneous collapse of the financial system. And now, of course, there would have been a very, very quick reaction to that, and maybe that the situation would have been saved or resolved, but there would have been considerable collateral harm caused by such a witless piece of public policy, which is kind of like that this is the ulterior objective, or my ulterior motive. My ultimate objective is for you to understand that people in positions of authority, such as the bank, don't necessarily speak with authority. That there is a lesson to be learned, namely that you should be critical when somebody in authority makes a statement. Think about what they say and ask yourself, is that true? That seems surprising. Why should we accept that proposition? This is a classic example that the bank has come out and proposed the abolition of money without thinking through the consequences of it doing so. Now, as it happens, the crisis was averted because for reasons to do with social policy, essentially, the bank decided not to abolish money. And I actually agree with the social policy. I think that the bank is right in its judgment from the perspective of social policy. I also think that the economic policy was broadly speaking sound, subject to a huge caveat, namely the economic consequences of abolishing money without providing an alternative form of money would have been an economic disaster. But if you just leave that aside and assume that was actually resolved, then I don't disagree with the bank's economic policy. I'm just trying to help you understand that when you view what the bank is saying through the prism of legal rules, you will see that it just doesn't make sense. We should expect that the bank does understand the fundamental legal rules which apply to money. If it has the function of regulating the banking sector, which sits on top of a very old and very well-established set of laws, then the bank ought to understand what those laws are and ought to be able to see things through the prism of legal rules. I actually personally spoke to somebody, a reasonably senior official at the bank, about this report and conveyed my concerns. And subsequently, the bank came out with a subsequent report last year, actually, saying that it was going to provide an alternative form of money. I can't say for certain that was in response to my criticism of the report made personally to the official. It's possible that somebody else made the same point, but it's also possible that they they thought about it in light of my criticism of it and came out with their subsequent report. So all is saved in the end. But there's a lesson there that when authorities make statements, consider them critically. Don't accept them at face value, because in fact, people in positions of authority don't always speak the truth. Mostly, at least in New Zealand, mostly it's not intentional. Sadly, sometimes it is. All right, that's all I wanted to say about the topic. I hope you found that interesting and challenging and thought-provoking. Did any of you have any questions about that? Richie.
Hi, Hamish. Yeah, these are kind of an aside, mainly out of my own curiosity, but two questions. Firstly, do you ever see cryptocurrencies actually being used as a proper form of money? Because at the moment, like the way I think about them, they're almost like investments. I appreciate in value and they go down kind of like a stock. But would you ever see that like being used in society as a form of money?
Well, I think that the Reserve Bank has actually announced that it's going to provide a digital form of currency. And so what will happen is that the law will be changed to say that money includes not merely banknotes and coins, but also the new electronic form of currency. But that would then cease to be a cryptocurrency. The whole concept of a cryptocurrency is it's a sort of a hidden currency. Are they used in transactions? Yes, they certainly are, both legitimately in legitimate transactions and also in illegitimate transactions. So you will see, actually I hope you won't see, the use of cryptocurrencies in illegal transactions, the black market, but you make the point that cryptocurrencies are used as a form of investment. It's true. What actually happens is that people use actual money to purchase their investment, and then they have to sell out of the investment to realize the value. That's if the value of the thing is going up, as it has done reasonably consistently, but that is not inevitable. But the key point is that it is not in and of itself a universal measure of value. I have a notion that one of the Scandinavian countries may have by law made Bitcoin an actual form of currency. I'm not certain about that, or it's possible that it may just have established its own electronic digital form of money. But just believe me when I say that it's true that people use cryptocurrencies for transactions, but that's been true of barter generally for thousands of years. People bartered before they ever entered into sales because the very concept of money was only invented in 600 BC. Prior to that time, any form of transaction was in the nature of either barter itself or a contract of barter. And it's only when money is invented by the Lydians in 600 BC, this idea of a measure of extrinsic value, that you get the concept of a sale being developed. So it's only when cryptocurrencies are turned into the legal tender of a jurisdiction, such as New Zealand, Australia, that then the transactions will become sales. Prior to that, they are forms of barter, probably contractual barters. So, people do invest in cryptocurrencies as an investment, hoping against hope that they continue to raise in value. Warren Buffett, who's that very, very successful investor in the United States, never invests in assets, the only return on which is a capital gain. He only ever invests in assets that produce a return. Cryptocurrencies don't produce a return. They only increase or decrease in value as a matter of capital. There's no income derived therefrom. So he takes the view that those kinds of investments are intrinsically risky, and he doesn't support them. He doesn't invest in them. So does that answer your question, Richie?
Yeah, no, that's really good to get some extra thoughts on that. And it actually answered my second question as well, which was what would replace cash in New Zealand, and that kind of Reserve Bank proposing the electronic currency.
Yeah, they're going to develop an electronic currency, which will be distinct from bank balances. Bank balances will continue to be contingent debt and contingent mandate obligations, and you will simply perform the obligations using the new so-called digital currency. So it'll have the same function as current money, although it'll have a different form. It'll be an electronic form, but it will have the same function as money currently has, namely the universal measure of value, and then derivatively the universal storage of value, the universal exchange of value, and also the universal unit of account. Okay.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It'll be cool to see how it would be like a New Zealand dollar. Would it be a separate thing? And
what it will be is a very secure way of recording numbers. And you only increment the numbers by getting numbers from somebody else, and that's what it will be, because that's in the end all. I'm sorry. That's all it could possibly be, because it's an extrinsic measure of value rather than an intrinsic measure of value. All you need is to have as a collection of numbers. But the magic will be in the security around the acquisition of these numbers and the disposal of them. All right, I better stop at that point because it's 4:32, so I don't want to detain you from your any later lectures. All right, well, thank you two for attending. As I said, I've recorded this lecture, this tutorial for those who weren't able to attend. So. All righty. Yep. Have a nice, safe, and productive break, and a happy Easter. And I look forward to meeting you in person after the break. Okay. And I'll make the announcement about the terms test next week. Okay.
Fantastic. Cheers, Hamish. Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Have a good break. Bye.
Bye.